Tēnā koto katoa, ko Campbell Naish toku ingoa. Welcome to you all to our first panel for the afternoon. I'm pleased to say, Patrick, that I believe my team has great depth and talent, and I'm hoping that you'll all benefit a lot from today's session, which is what is driving demand, international demand for New Zealand honey. So our objectives this afternoon are really to share exporter insights into what this year, the coming couple of years look like from an exporter point of view, what we will see as far as those influences on our markets, and what we think may be some beneficial insights to people throughout the supply chain here in New Zealand, and particularly you beekeepers. One of the themes, I think, from both AGMs I've attended around this conference has been the importance of communication, sharing of information, and particularly at times like now where there is a lot of stress throughout the industry. Information is more important than ever because nobody is comfortable with the uncertainty many of us are experiencing. And so hopefully this session will add to some of the understanding of what's happening in the markets, answer some of your questions, and of course give you a chance to ask further questions. Thank you for that very extensive introduction. That takes basically my first page off, so we'll keep going. I'll give you a few comments to open up from the UMF perspective on international markets at the moment, but really the really hot information is going to come from our panel today, who are all extensively experienced at working directly with markets in market. They are the guys who are having the conversations on a daily basis with the people who influence what's going on here in our industry back in New Zealand. And so, I urge you to obviously listen, but to engage with them towards the end of this session. We've had a really great session with Patrick. We'll still work around a 45-minute time frame for ourselves, even though we finished a little bit late. So we'll hopefully be leaving at least 10 minutes at the end of the session for you all to ask questions. So from the UMF perspective, we're very fortunate. We have a very high level view of what is happening in international markets in particular. UMF now, our members export to 60 countries. The UMF trademark is registered in 55 countries, and we're always looking at where strategically we need to protect that IP around UMF. We have just over 160 members, so we obviously have the good fortune to hear a lot about what's happening in different businesses with different business models across different markets. And we learn a lot about what drives our industry outside New Zealand from a broader perspective. What we've seen lately, and this is not telling you anything new, is that obviously post-COVID demand has seen what looks like a very significant drop in export volumes, but if you take a look at the 10-year trend line, we're actually sitting as an industry right on that growth line from the last 10 years. And what we're really interested in now is how can we support industry, our marketers, our export partners, and their customers in market to actually lift the direction of that trend line. I think one of the things we think is a really important insight for the industry overall is when you look at the decline of late, monofloral Mānuka honey packed for retail, sealed in New Zealand for authenticity and purity, has actually held up relatively well. And it's a clear sign that the demand globally is for high quality Mānuka honey. And we currently have around about, UMF on around about 70 to 75% of the monofloral jars of Mānuka honey that are packed for retail and leave New Zealand. And so that just gives us great confidence that there are a huge number of exporters, marketers, processors and packers committed to quality in the industry. But it's not easy exporting, and that's what I think it's really important that everybody across the supply chains understands some of the complexity that these guys and all our exporters deal with. Every market's different, and every market consumes Mānuka honey for a different reason, and they eat it in a different way. They buy it from different locations. They use it at different times of day. They consume different amounts every day. And when we get up there and we sell into those markets, we have to take that into account and make sure that our messages resonate with those markets. And so there's a lot of very skilled teams in New Zealand who have over the years developed the ability to get in and place their product and position their product in markets to address that. Like the way these sort of challenges play out, also are in the regulatory point of view, market access, and just general cultural use of products. And so exporters need to make sure that they have honey that they can put into any market, that they can use they can adapt at any time, so they can move product from one market to another market. It has to meet the highest quality standards so that it's a flexible product. They need to know who their consumers are, where they buy from, so that they can promote to those consumers at the right time in the right place. And they need to know, obviously, how they take it, because if you're selling to a market that eats Mānuka honey off a spoon, there's not a lot of benefit in telling them that they should keep taking it in their tea every day. So, I guess on top of that, quality is essential, and it has to be sustained, and that begins with our producers here at home in New Zealand, who are critical partners, and from UMF point of view, something we really know is that we need to be working with you, with the exporters, and getting you the information so you understand what quality means in markets, and can support producers and packers to actually produce the honey that the markets are looking for. So that's enough from me. What I really want to do is move on to our panel here. And so we'll start with a wide open question, I think, for Rebecca, which is really, Rebecca, can you tell us from your point of view at Taylor Pass, what does the global market look like in the next year for you, and what are the long-term trends you see coming down the pipeline?
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Oh, there we go. Good afternoon, everyone. I think it's no surprise to anyone to know that the honey industry is challenged. It's difficult. And I will base this directly on Taylor Pass. I'm still extremely positive for the future of the honey industry, and I base this based on what comes across my desk. So I think we still have some amazing opportunities, and I think that comes from the fact that we've got an incredible product. And I think that's something I really want to reiterate. People love Mānuka honey. There is a growing interest in new markets. So, for example, the US market, which you'd think would be well established, is actually quite new to Mānuka. Across Europe, much better established. Across Southeast Asia, very well understood, very well understood in China. But I certainly feel that the opportunities are still very much there, but we do need to work a lot more collaboratively to be able to achieve some of these opportunities. But I think that there is a great future still for this industry, and I'm excited to see what comes next.
Are there any themes you're seeing across markets in general, Rebecca, that are driving how our products are perceived?
Price. You know, there really has been, and this is where we need to work collaboratively, there really has been a race to the bottom. And unfortunately what I'm finding is I'm talking to retailers who are saying to me, you know, oh, I can get it for this price. And, you know, we know the cost of producing honey. And some of those prices simply are not sustainable. And all that does is drops the price for all of us, the market price. So I think price is an issue and something that we all want to keep the premium price, to keep our product as a premium product. And that is something that we need to work together towards.
Great, thank you. Katherine, from the seat at OHA, what are you seeing in the markets at the moment?
Yeah, kia ora. Thanks for having me up here today. I think from OHA's perspective, you know, it's been a tough time, and I'll sort of let you know I've been with OHA for 4.5 years, so I sort of came in after some of these challenges had started to hit. So it's been a real point of sort of striving for something better throughout the time that I've been there. What we're seeing in the market at the moment is that the partnerships that we've built over a number of years now are the trust that we've built is starting to come through. So I think the communication is improving. They're showing us what they want to do. They're looking for the support from us to achieve that. They're certainly under cost pressures. And I sort of talk about them because we are a B2B model, so we rely on our partners in market to be our eyes and ears and to be our experts on the ground, and we support them as best we can from here. So I think it's opening up those communication channels means that we can better respond to what's happening in market, and I think that'll be really important for us going forward, is that we understand actually what's happening. And as an industry that we work together so that we can respond to what those changes are and make the most of the opportunity we have with Mānuka, which, and I would absolutely reiterate that, you know, we're so lucky to have such an amazing taonga that comes from our country. You know, I think I reflect on, like, you know, travel as a younger person going out with a Kiwi passport. That was an absolute gold passport. You could go anywhere you wanted. People typically liked you. You know, you kind of got on with people, and it was a pass to all sorts of things. And I think Mānuka kind of is reflected in that as well. It's our pass to being in all sorts of amazing retail opportunities and innovation. That I think, you know, would be crazy to not put more effort and energy as an industry together in the right direction with it.
Thank you. Thank you. Sean, you're very much a student of the markets. What are the biggest influences or you know, the biggest trends that you're seeing in the market at the moment for Mānuka?
Yeah, look, I agree with what the ladies have said. What I would add is that I think over the last 3 years, particularly post-COVID, we're no longer the new kid on the block when it comes to health and well-being products. You know, there's a lot of new products. People are incredibly interested in health and well-being, preventive wellness, immunity building, but there's been so many new products into that space, and we don't operate in a vacuum. And we sit in here talking about our own product as if it's the only thing that exists, but we sell B2B, we sell through distributors, wholesalers, retailers who are being pitched these products all the time, and in those cases it is about shelf space, it's about margin, it's about price, not just our price relative to one another, but our price relative to all of those new things that are coming there. So I think, you know, we've got a job to do to really understand what are the true benefits of Mānuka, and we can talk about the lack of research and all of those things that go into it, but really what are we selling, and what is the value proposition, and who are we going up against in the next 3 to 5 years as we look to try and get growth back into the market again.
Thank you. What about the customers themselves, the buyers, the distributors? You know, we're no longer the new kids on the block. So how does that impact our relationships with those guys who's often the gatekeepers to the market?
Well, look, I think that they're interested. They're genuinely interested that New Zealand has a good story. New Zealand Mānuka has a good story. I think it's a confusing product for many of them. We do that to ourselves with the rating systems. We do it with the different brands, the mono versus the multi-floral type thing. So, you know, they are looking for simplicity. They're looking for a clear message. You know, when you take something to a retailer and they say, well, how are you going to help pull that off shelf? They're looking for support. You can't just walk in and say, here's my product. It's really wonderful. It does this, that, and the other thing, and expect people to pull it off shelf. So they are really looking for your assistance, your marketing investment. And that's the piece I think we really need to focus on over the next few years. We've been incredibly focused on production up until now. I've talked about this in the past. I think we're well on our way to that correction with the hive numbers coming down. I'd argue there's still far too much capacity in terms of processing in the country. But really the focus is getting some of that spend, some of that investment onto the front end, and ideally going with a relatively consistent message about why New Zealand Mānuka is the real deal relative to competitors, and why it's the kind of product that they should be putting in their stores and marketing to their consumers.
Great. Have you got anything to add, Rebecca?
Yeah, I've just come back from 2.5 weeks in the US, and I was there for shows, so, the B2B, the B2C, meeting of retailers, and absolutely, Sean is totally right. I think one of the big mistakes brands make when they go to markets, particularly to the US, is they go in not understanding what the retailers want from them. And to Sean's point, they want us to work with them to get the product off shelf, but I think a lot of Kiwi brands don't realise what that cost is. And I've met with some of you, and I've talked to people about this, but really when you enter a market like the US, it's basically a 3-year investment before you start making money. You need to expect to fund this for 3 years. They expect you to be in market, to run promos, to do the activations, to be a part of that journey to really get the product off shelf. And that's an expensive piece of work. And we really need all the brands, and a lot of brands are very active and do get behind it, but it's not enough. We're a drop in an ocean. So that would be my point.
Yeah, I think the commentary around how we're filling the shelves is quite an important one, and I think we've underinvested in our brand, in our marketing, in a number of markets, and focused on putting more products that are really similar on the shelf with a label. But I think it's about going deeper and actually marketing really well, marketing your brand and spending the time and energy to put in the long-term investment that it does require to grow a recognisable brand in these markets. So I think that really talks to that collaboration piece, and also to innovation and where we take those brands in the future, but how we become more dynamic and interesting and bring on new consumers through the existing brands that we have, that we've all invested in over time as an industry to create and to plant in these markets. It's about enhancing them rather than trying to elbow out and create a lot of similar products.
Thank you. Excellent. I think in this changing market dynamic that we have, it's not only just straight purchasing environment that's changing, but the trends and the drivers behind purchasing at a consumer level are changing. What do you all see as some of the most influential changes in market that we have to be cognizant, right from the point of harvest and production through our supply chains? And are there things we have to do differently as we move forward to keep growing and be relevant in the marketplace? I'll open that up to anyone who wants to lead off.
Yeah, it's a bit of a tough one, I guess. One of our key markets is China, and C4s have become well known as a potential for adulteration, and the testing of C4s has become a really important and costly undertaking for all of us. And that's not probably going to go away for a long time, so I think definitely control of C4s would be very high on my list for anything around how we can grow sustainably back and perform well in market, regardless of the fact that Mānuka naturally has high C4s. So it's a call out to MPI and anyone who can support us to negotiate with these various countries and perhaps give us some passes like some of the tropical honeys do for special varieties. But I think that would be a key thing that we just need to undertake as an industry to help us move forward.
Great, thank you. Rebecca?
I'd say exactly the same, compliance. I mean, compliant honey, and you touched on that earlier, we need honey that's compliant to multiple markets, and that's not as easy as it sounds. So certainly that compliant honey is important for us.
Yep. We're moving forward. We've heard a lot about communication, particularly at the AGMs, both UMFHA and today's ApiNZ AGM. What do you think, if are the messages that we need to be getting from the marketplace to our beekeepers that are going to be critical to helping us sustain and grow our industry into the future?
Yeah, look, I think what I'd say, I mean, just to give a bit of context, excuse me, the importance of, I think it's important to understand where we are now relative to where we've been and the expectations of people in the industry. So right now, the New Zealand honey exports are where they were pre-COVID, almost dollar for dollar. So we've seen this rise, this gold rush up until 2019, and then we saw a massive jump in 2020, and we're back somewhere where we are, or where we were then. I think it's important for those people who have perhaps come along to the industry a little bit later in the piece, that since 2014 at the very least, all the way through to 2020, we were running surpluses every year. We were producing more honey than we were selling. And I don't think you can undersell what happened in 2020 as being really a root cause of where we find ourselves now. And there's two big things. We had that massive crop at the start of 2020. Then we went into COVID, which initially was enormous. It created 50% growth in exports. Orders were flooding out the door. By the time we came to the 2021 season, nobody was going to drop hive numbers. If anything, you were going to double down because it was just the best thing we'd ever seen. And right at the time we then went into that next season, having had a record crop the year before, we saw the markets go into lockdown. So when you think about the context of running small surpluses every year to then having a massive surplus over a 2-year period, and a market now that has gone back to basically where we were, that's why we find ourselves in a position with so much stock in the market, so much stock still here, and your honey not flowing through to us as packers. What it comes back to, and to join the dot back to the comms thing, is we've now got to do the hard yards of opening up the new markets that Rebecca talks about, of telling people about our product. And unfortunately, we have the backdrop of some of these exciting new health and wellbeing products come along. It's why I think the correction in the production side of things is so important. And we will get there. And for those who saw Patrick's presentation earlier, many of those charts look like the honey industry. And I don't know if we've bottomed out yet, but it feels like we're getting pretty close. So the messages now have to be about sustainability, and the messages I'd be giving to beekeepers as opposed to consumers is focus on what the consumer wants. Work with whoever your preferred packer is. Try and identify what their needs are going to be. Look, there's demand across the whole spectrum of New Zealand honeys and all grades of Mānuka honey, but there's not a rebound coming. And I get asked this question a lot about, when are sales going to bounce back? There is no bounce back. This is as good as we've ever been if you take out the anomaly that was the COVID years. We've never been higher than we are now. And it's only going, there's plenty of gold. I often say the gold rush is over. There's still plenty of gold. We just have to mine it in a more sustainable way and arguably with fewer participants so that you can afford to invest the money. So, my message is really about it's going to take time. It's going to be another 18 or 24 months of difficulty as we move through, but we will get there in a couple of years' time, and provided we don't shoot ourselves in the foot by dropping the prices too low and selling inferior quality honey, because we'll find it very hard to get our premium back after that, then we'll come through this.
Any other comments from you guys?
No, just exactly to your point, it's about new markets. We're in so many markets. I don't know top of my head. Maybe one of you can tell me how many markets Mānuka is in. But there are many new markets that we can enter, and I think that's what we need to focus on.
We often hear that the low-hanging fruit has been plucked. So what does that mean to you guys, and what's the next step if there's still gold in them, there are hills, but the fruit's been plucked? What are the next steps as exporters, as an industry, go and find that gold?
I would say there's markets that are emerging now that we would say is just what China was 10 years ago. So I think that there's new opportunities left, right and centre, and there's probably some opportunities there from a government perspective to support us in accessing some of those markets. But I think the learnings we've had along the way as an industry, we need to actually put that together so that the way that we establish ourselves and potentially going in there with, say, a consistent mark for our quality, perhaps it's indicating its provenance, maybe it's more than that. But to go in the way we mean to go forward is probably the best way of creating a market that we want to be in and is sustainable and good value for us going forward.
Any other comments, team? No? So if we talk about the value of the New Zealand industry runs right through the supply chain and the supply chain working together. Where can beekeepers be working with their packers, their export partners? Where can packers be working with brands? What are the things we need to be doing differently as we look forward into the next 5 years that will support an industry that continues to grow and kick on from this challenging moment? What are the things we need to be considering together?
Yeah, look, I think we've got to try and learn from what's happened, try not to waste this crisis. The worst thing in my view that could happen is that we end up with a shortage of hives in a couple of years' time. We flip-flop back the other way. We see prices skyrocket in the short term while people get back into beekeeping again, and we end up in this whiplash effect that often happens in primary sectors as people chase volume and demand, and crops get pulled out and put back in and pulled out again. So for that, I think one of our biggest risks is around our price moving forward. We saw it a few years ago when we completely lost markets like white clover and even the likes of honeydew as our local pricing got too high. And some people in this room did a heck of a lot of work to get that market back again, but it is only achievable at a certain price. So I think we need to try and work together around cost minimisation, and it's bloody hard in the local environment, I get, but we need to try and optimise our costing so we're not doubling up on laboratory testing or we're not doubling up on other costs. We're actually looking at a more collaborative model, and then we're trying to take a long-term view of pricing. I'd be comfortable if we had an inflationary sort of price adjustment that we thought, yes, for the future of honey, it's going to continue to rise over time. The worst thing would be massive increases and then massive decreases as we look to clear that again. So, I think the collaboration has to come at all levels. I still think there's more consolidation needed in the industry. Excuse me. I still believe there are too many factories with running too many costs, and that if we were prepared to work together on a shared basis, compete in the market, but actually collaborate more locally to lower the cost base, then we will all be better off, and we will have more to invest in actually growing the size of the pie.
Yeah, I was just going to basically agree with Sean. I mean, at Taylor Powell's we talk about partnerships, and I think from the packers, the brand point of view, we need to work smart as well. We need to forecast, we need to work with our customers to understand what they need, and then we need to work closely with you all, with beekeepers. We produce a lot of our own honey, not all of it, and it's important that we communicate exactly what we need, and I think that'll be the key. But to your point, Sean, that's right. Do we have too many infrastructures in place? And that cost model, as I talked about, we are in a race to the bottom if we do not correct this, and that will not benefit anyone.
Katherine, any additional thoughts? No? So we'll throw the floor open to some questions shortly, but one last question. I haven't really warned you guys about this one, but one of the key things, we are still very much a niche industry. We operate in very narrow parts of markets around the world, and one of our strengths is our collective voice. So if there was one or two messages that you wished that everybody in the industry were all telling together to build a unified position for Mānuka honey out of New Zealand, what would they be? Why don't you go first, Sean?
Yeah, look, I'll get back on my hobby horse that I've talked about before. I think the simple argument that processed and packed in New Zealand is the only way you can prove authenticity of your product. And if you are buying anything other than that, then I would question, particularly if it's coming at a lower price, I'd question why you're getting that price. So, we need to do everything we can to protect the integrity of product being sourced and packed here. We have a great biosecurity program. We don't import honey here. The Australians import honey. They can put imported honey into their local manufactured product and still call it product of Australia. There's all sorts of reasons for wanting to buy it locally. And I think with the removal of tariffs in the EU and the UK, we are removing some of the incentives to pack that product offshore. And frankly, for a product with as much value to be lost as ours, I don't understand why you would support that kind of model.
Absolutely, and I would be saying UMF certified as well, which validates exactly what you've just said. 100% New Zealand honey. You're right, we cannot import honey into New Zealand. That makes our honey different. Also antibiotic free. Those are things that, when it comes to comparing our honey to other honeys on shelf in other markets, it makes us different. We need to be careful not to rely just on New Zealand. It was interesting when we looked at the US market 5 years ago and we were talking to people about Mānuka honey. They looked at us blankly, what's that? Now they're starting to understand Mānuka honey, it's a honey that's good for me. The connection to New Zealand is not necessarily made. So I think we need to be building a brand, and absolutely. So to me, UMF certified, 100% honey, antibiotic free.
And I think when we talk about health and wellness, that's the message that everywhere in the world people understand with Mānuka. It's a wellness product. That's why they pay the higher price for it. That's why we shoot to the top of all those listings of the value of honey going into markets, despite the fact that our volume isn't that high. So I think it's really deeply understanding that and how we communicate in those markets, but as a core group that we understand what our top 5 offers are, what that does for people's health and wellness, and then we make sure that we manage that order depending on the consumer that we're trying to talk to. But we're trying to talk specifically to that consumer about their wellness, whether it's because they're trying to be a preventative measure, which is often across Asia, or whether they're trying to solve or treat something, which is sometimes what you see more of in Europe. So I think it's just getting really consistent in those messages, and we can all deliver them, and we can come across as a really united front around how Mānuka is sold. But I would agree that having it packed in New Zealand, having a consistent mark, definitely takes away those conversations, which means we can focus on other things, which is the glorious things that Mānuka can actually do for people, why they would choose to buy it, how it helps them as a consumer, as an individual.
Sorry, I would just add one thing. For all of us to be saying the same thing, when we're going to retailers, we're just confusing them if we come in with different aspects. So I think it's a joint voice.
Excellent. Thank you. So we're about to open the floor for questions. Any last comments you guys would like to share before we do? Otherwise, we would love to hear from you guys on the floor. Do we have any questions? Yes. It's just in the middle here. Ooh. Nothing's off at the moment. Yep. Just up a wee bit. Yeah.
So, kia ora, thank you, panel, and Campbell for the session today. You talked about unifying voice, and one of the hardest things in market, it seems to me, is the split voice that we've got in New Zealand around UMF and NGO. So, you also talk about simplicity of message, what you're trying to communicate, what the message that we present as UMF in market around Mānuka honey and how that fits with what you're saying about unification of our kōrero, of our messaging, and simplifying the message that we're presenting. Kia ora.
Thanks, very good question. And it comes up all the time. And essentially what I say to people is UMF is the gold standard of Mānuka honey, and that it covers 4 factors. MGO, which is the potency, so it covers anyone that's looking at the MGO factor. It's got the Leptospirans caparium, which is the authenticity, that it is Mānuka honey from New Zealand, and the DHA HMF, which is a freshness and shelf life. Honestly, when I have a time, when I get to sit down with a retailer and I take them through the story and I compare the different gradings, it's not a complicated conversation. It's actually really, really straightforward. I mean, I sit them down, go through each of them, compare. It's not complicated. So to your point, yes, it's easy, and it comes down to us all saying the same thing, which is that to us, to UMF brands that is, UMF is the gold standard of Mānuka honey.
Yeah, I think it's tricky though. And as a long-time UMF member, I agree, excuse me. But I also think if we're fortunate enough to go down the path of seeking a geographic indicator and getting support for Mānuka honey is coming from New Zealand, there needs to be a trust mark on it. There needs to be that simplicity to say to any consumer or any retailer in the world, if it doesn't have this mark, it is not genuine, authentic New Zealand Mānuka honey. The political issue is, what is that mark? Because if we use the UMF mark, it has connotations of a rating system versus MGO, and I know you can put both on the label. So your question is well asked. There is a simple answer. Whether or not that answer is tenable to everybody in the industry is a different matter, but we almost need to be at that point to say, look, unless we do something like this, we're going to just wobble on as a boutique industry that no one really gets, because we won't have the capability to scale. And whether we can get past that, I think, is going to be proven by time.
Thank you for that. Great question. Yes.
Hi, my name is Daniel, and I come as a little baby or enthusiast. I have traveled Singapore, I have traveled in India, I lived there, and I've traveled all around. It's not that simple. When you look at UMF and MGO, I think the body must really come to a conclusion either from the government level or from the consumer point of view. It is really, really difficult. And the prices vary from point to point. And so I think it's reasonable, I'm from the healthcare, from a research background, to come to one conclusion and say, hey, let's stand with UMF or let's stand with MGO. I think that would be a reasonable one, because it's really, in terms of the unification that we talked about, this is absolutely, if you want to really market it well, I think we need to come to some kind of a midline and say, we'll go with UMF or MGO. Because I've seen many, many confusion points. So it's definitely not at all, if you say that it's very easy for the sellers, it's certainly not easy for the consumers.
So no, I'm not saying it's easy for the consumer, absolutely, and that's why we're doing the education piece to explain it. But the new UMF lockup actually has the MGO. So on a jar that has UMF, it has also got the MGO content, which means that the consumer, or the retailer, when they're comparing products on shelf, has the ability to compare MGO with MGO or UMF with UMF. I think that was the key I was trying to make, sorry.
Right, one last question.
While we're on the note of confusing consumers, Ricky Leahy stood up at the ApiNZ AGM this morning and talked about the Mānuka honey standard and how we've got the multi-standard. How does marketing multifloral honey fit into your business models, and do you see it as a sustainable way for us to go forward marketing honey? What's its value?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's quite complicated because with the MPI and the 5 markers, there's already a lot to explain there. And that's one of the challenges because we can't kind of cover the 5 markers, what it is, and the grade and everything all in one. So that's where it starts to get complicated. Anything we can do to take that complication down is helpful because then we can actually get the other messages about the great benefits of Mānuka across. Otherwise, they're sitting so far down the list that we never get to them. Consumers are already turned off, confused. So I agree that that's a challenge. At the moment, there's a lot, depending on the country that we're talking about, the market that we're talking about, it can differ as to how much multifloral is going in. I think some markets should be surprised about the dominance of monofloral because there's a real understanding and deep knowledge of honey and the benefits of it, so that's actually relatively low. It is a bit difficult. I find it a bit challenging myself to explain, especially when you talk to Europeans, because the Europeans have quite a strong view of what constitutes a honey or a region or they're quite clinical about their approach, which I've learnt a lot about over the last sort of year or so. So it's a challenging topic. I would say as a business, what we do is use lower grades to encourage new consumers so that we can sell higher grades. That is the number one focus. Ideally, it's not in the multifloral category, but it's a monofloral Mānuka, but just depends on the consumer that you're targeting and what channel that you're targeting, what kind of value they're willing to pay for the product, just to try and expand your audience, get more knowledge around Mānuka, and then obviously bring consumers into what we would say is a high-quality monofloral Mānuka.
Can I just add, Patrick, look, it is a good question, and it's, you've got to go back to 2018 when the MPI standard came in to get a little bit of context as well, right? I'm looking at my sheet of paper now. Currently, $60 million of export revenue in multi-Mānuka. So you have to think about what would happen with that 60 million. Now, some of it will go into non-Mānuka and some might become mono. You might be able to grow that. So there's a commercial component. And in 2018, when MPI put the standard in place, there were threats of legal action by members of the industry who were not happy where the standard was going. So there was a background to why the standard became what it was, right? I don't think anybody is sitting here arguing it is absolutely the best definition for Mānuka honey, but there was some context beyond just the science that had to go into it. I think the other thing we'd say is if you took that whole market out right now, and I'm not arguing for it to remain, in the absence of any other rules regarding bulk honey or Australian Mānuka, what happens to that market? Because you're not going to see the Australians back off. You're not going to see people stop exporting in bulk and cut it down and actually compete with ourselves in the market as well. So it's part of a bigger issue. I think there's an argument to say if you don't have it, it's a much cleaner, more simple story around a rating system and an authenticity.
Yeah, wrap it up. Yeah.
But there's some implications, and if we're prepared to go back to go forward, then maybe it's the right thing to do.
All right, thank you. Look, unfortunately, we're out of time. I think there's another couple of questions out there, but please grab our panelists after this as we break to ask your questions, or myself if it's a question for the UMFHA. I'd just like to thank you all for your attention. I'd like to thank panelists Sean, Rebecca and Katherine, who's battled through slightly under the weather to be with us today. So thank you very much, and enjoy the last part of the day, and we will see you again. Thank you very much.